This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stockbox interview.
Joining us today is Kyle Bennett, the Head of Operations at Aura Carbon. Thank you very much for joining us today. Kyle, how are you?
I'm good, Mark. Thank you for having me. Really excited to have a chat.
Indeed. Well, of course, we did our podcast, our Market Musings podcast with you only a week or so ago, where we really got to know a bit about your background and we talked in depth about where you've come from, your motivations, your drivers. So I definitely encourage people to listen to that to learn more about your history here and also a bit more in detail about carbon credits, because today what we want to focus on really is Aura, the company, what you're all about, what products you're bringing out, when it's coming out and why people should get involved. So I wonder if you could start us off by perhaps giving that sort of elevator pitch, if you like, what Aura Carbon is all about.
Yeah, Aura Carbon is all about carbon credits and really democratizing this market of carbon credits. It's a market that up until this point has been a little bit, I think, opaque and not accessible to a regular investor. Really dominated by institutional players. And we believe that regular investors have an opportunity here, have an opportunity to invest in carbon credits that not only support a positive outcome for our planet's future, but also a wealth opportunity. And it's just not been accessible before. And so what we're doing is we're creating a platform that allows people to participate in this market in a way that they've never had before. They're empowered to buy carbon credits, hold them, sell them, and then, behind all this is just a lot of kind of cutting edge technology that we focused on to build an experience that's streamlined, efficient, just super easy to use, and honestly, a little bit fun as well.
Okay.
And so, we believe that by doing this, by opening this market up to retail investors, we can solve some of the problems that the carbon market has, which is, it needs increased transparency. It needs more liquidity. And these kind of things can be brought by regular investors participating in the carbon market in a way they've never done before.
Okay, so really an easy, user-friendly method to buy, hold, sell carbon credits. So, of course, the next question is, what are carbon credits for people who are not the big industry players like Tesla, for example? What does it mean for the retail, me and you?
Right. So I think the most important thing to understand here is that a carbon credit represents 1 ton of carbon dioxide emissions or its equivalent. So that could be another CO or another greenhouse gas emission like methane. And the credit is the avoidance or removal of that emission from the atmosphere. And what it allows the end user, either an individual or a company, to do is to offset their own emissions. So they can look and say, I've emitted 1 ton of carbon in my trip to Italy or in manufacturing some shoes, and I need to bring that down to 0. So how I do that is I support a carbon offset project that is somewhere around the world that is, say, working on avoiding deforestation or actually removing carbon dioxide from the air through a technological or nature-based method. And these projects create the credits that people can purchase and trade in.
Okay. And these sort of responsibilities, just thinking on that, I can understand why those responsibilities are put on the big corporations, of course, climate, neutral, net zero, etc., 2030, 2050, all these government initiatives. So, of course, they need to be putting these things on the bigger companies to offset their carbon, to become net zero. Do you ever think that responsibility will come to the individual as well from a higher level, or is it more on individuals to sort of consider to, take it on themselves to try and offset their carbon?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't, in the near term at least, see it being the sort of domain of responsibility for an individual. I think when we look at carbon emissions, they're broadly categorized into sort of three scopes. This is from a company's perspective. So there's scope one, which is manufacturing, resource extraction, that kind of thing. Let's take, for example, Apple. Scope one would be building the iPhone, extracting the materials to build the iPhone. Scope two is their own operations. That would be their marketing, their shipping, all that kind of thing. And then scope three is the use of their product. And so the carbon market has the concept of companies offsetting the actual end use of their products in scope three emissions. And that largely is and should be kind of the domain of corporate responsibility.
Okay. So the next question then really is, what's the why? What's the need you want to fulfill here? I understand you want to give retail investors access to trading carbon credits. Is that really in its simplest term? It's the right thing to do to open the door, let's say, so that it's not just behind for the institutions and big brokerage houses, etc. Why should retail investors really get excited about this?
Well, it's a new asset class for starters, or at least one that retail investors haven't been able to participate in. So there's, I think, a tremendous amount of opportunity there. It's a growing market. It's a commodity like any other. It's just not one that you can go trade in. Like you could trade in an ounce of gold or pork bellies or what have you. But carbon hasn't been accessible to regular investors. And it's a market that has a ton of potential. So the voluntary carbon market at the moment is sort of about $2 billion annually. And it's really forecast to grow up to sort of $25, maybe even $30 billion by 2030. So there's a lot of momentum behind it. Certainly a lot of companies have made net zero or carbon neutral commitments by 2030, as have governments. And with that, there's only so much supply in the market, and supply is challenging and difficult to bring online. There's a lot of methodologies and frameworks and regulations that carbon projects have to jump through. So that's going to honestly probably create a supply crunch that people can benefit from. Now, altruistically at Aura, we believe that carbon credits are a really important part of the climate solution, and not every emission can be driven out of supply chains or company operations through reductions alone. And so companies need a way to sort of get rid of that last portion of emissions. And we believe quite strongly that that's offsets and therefore, or credits rather. Therefore, these carbon markets support a goal of decarbonizing our economy, which we all recognize is a really important part of mitigating the impacts of climate change.
Okay. And as I understand about carbon credits, I mean, you can research it, but it's certainly not talked about a lot in the public domain at the moment. And I think when I talk to other people about it, I can get the feeling that it's exciting. And I talk to someone else and they get the feeling, but then someone else is like, okay, I don't really understand this. But it will come round, I think, that's going to be a very common thing that people understand. And there's lots of different carbon credits, aren't there? I guess you're going to have access to these things on the Aura app, which we'll come on to in a moment when that's launching. So I guess you're going to have a few of these different carbon offset projects or carbon credits available to trade in. How can people learn about the different projects and what is a good investment or what's trending, that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. I think like any new thing, there is a barrier to entry in education and language. And that's something that we're also looking to solve. People need to equip themselves with the language that the carbon market is kind of wrapped in. So you hear terms like avoidance and permanence and additionality and all that kind of stuff. So a couple of things. One, I co-host a podcast called Offtakes. You can find it at offtakes.show. It's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Spotify, where we really go in depth to sort of democratizing the language, decodifying the carbon markets, really making the understanding of it accessible to all. We also have a lot of content on our social media for Aura Carbon. You find us on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter, X, that are all about learning about the carbon markets, the different project types that are available. We have a lot of stuff on our blog too at auracarbon.com that supports that journey for the individual investor. And I think once someone has that understanding, they can make informed decisions about what credits to buy. And certainly there are so many different carbon projects. You're not going to be able to buy all of them or have access to all of them. So we're kind of curating the supply on Aura Carbon in a way that we think is most accessible for the regular investor. Now, what kind of trends have we seen that people should be aware of? I think largely to use some of the language of the carbon market, there's really two kinds of camps of carbon credits. There's avoidance credits, which up until this point have represented a large, if not the bulk of the market. Those are projects that are designed to avoid carbon emissions. So an example of that would be a forest that is protected. It was otherwise slated to be chopped down or developed or mined or what have you, but it's been protected, and therefore the release of its emissions from being destroyed have been avoided. And then on the other side, there is removal. And that is a project that is either through a nature-based solution like growing plants and then turning them into biochar, or through a technology-based solution like direct air capture. It's removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And we see, especially this year, the trend towards removal projects. One of the things that's really important about removal, it tends to have what's called a higher permanence. And permanence is the amount of time that a project promises to keep those emissions out of the atmosphere. And with, say, deforestation avoidance, that's generally sort of 25 to 40 years, depending on the methodology. And with something like biochar in a carbon dioxide removal category, or what we'll call CDR, it's more like 100, 120 years of permanence, and potentially even further than that. So that kind of high quality, high permanence is attracting not only companies who are sort of staking their reputation on, or their net zero reputation on using these credits, but it's also attracting traders. To be honest, institutional traders, because they just command a higher price.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. There's a lot to kind of think about there, and sort of go away and research and come back and pick up on some points. But when it comes to, we spoke to Mike not so long ago about, of course, the app, and that's the main thing. That's the access. That's the breakdown of barrier to entry there. Where are you at with the development of the app? You talk about curating the supply. So are you still in the sort of building up phase, getting different carbon credits on there, getting exchanges working, testing? When do you hope to actually launch the app?
Right. Well, we're really in those final phases. So at this point, we're putting polish on the car, so to speak. We're hoping to launch it in the very near future. And it's going to be available in Europe, the United Kingdom, potentially a couple other markets from the Apple App Store. You can actually download the app right now, and you can take a sneak peek. You can join our wait list. You can have a look at how it operates. Access to a lot of our content through the app. But in the very near future, we'll be executing our first sort of open market trades, and people can start actually purchasing credits, which is really exciting.
Okay. And just final thoughts, Kyle, on the news flow to come, of course, the big one is the release of the app. But in terms of any other kind of key developments, we've only got a month and a half left really before the end of the year. Can we expect some good announcements before year end?
Yeah, I mean, we're working so quickly at executing those first trades, and we hope to have some news on that very, very shortly for people. And then just in the market, or in the world of carbon in general, we're coming up to a really big event, which is COP28. That's not obviously related directly to Aura, but I think what it's going to do is show the demand for pricing of carbon around the world. There are some really big developments coming out of the Paris Agreement that for the first time will be on full display at COP28. And if people don't know, that's the Conference of Parties. It's the United Nations Climate Conference. And this year it happens at the end of November. It's in Dubai. And one of its key sort of takeaways is this first, what's called the global stock take. And that is countries coming together from around the world to really put on full display their progress towards the climate commitments that they've made. And this is the first time that we're doing it. So it's a reflection to show how far the world's come and probably how much further we have to go. And the way that impacts the market is it's going to show the demand for carbon, for pricing on carbon, for expansion of carbon markets. And I think that's going to be a really exciting development and potentially have spillover impact for Aura.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Carl Bennett, the Head of Operations at Aura Carbon, and we'll speak again soon.
Cheers.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programs at stockboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.